Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, Russian President Vladimir Putin vows to do all that he can to recover the bodies and the black boxes from the crash site of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. North Korea defends its missile programs denounced by the UN and presses ahead with peace offensives. Plus, the deadliest day since the start of Israel's ground invasion of Gaza. Around 100 Palestinians and at least 13 Israeli troops were killed on Sunday, raising the death toll to well over 400. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's new Monday, July 21st here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime, Russian President Vladimir Putin has promised the Dutch Prime Minister that he'll help to retrieve bodies and black boxes from the Ukrainian rebel-held crash site of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17.
More than 4 days after the plane was down, the crash scene remains in total chaos, with reports of bodies being loaded into refrigerated railway carriages by the very people suspected of shooting the plane down. Son Jung-in reports.
A spokesperson for the Dutch government press service said the latest conversation between Prime Minister Mark Rutte and Russian President Vladimir Putin focused on practical matters, including the handing over of the black boxes that were seen being retrieved from the crash site. The spokesperson said Putin vowed his full cooperation in handling the case, as well as allowing unrestricted access to the site. Prime Minister of self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic Alexander Borodai said they were ready to hand the black box to the International Civil Aviation Organization.
We are keeping the black box in Donetsk. We are waiting for international civil aviation representatives to arrive.
The rebel leader also said the bodies of victims recovered from the crash site would remain in refrigerated containers at a train station in the town of Torres in the meantime. International monitors had reported that the human remains were headed to an unknown site, expressing concerns about their whereabouts. Western leaders are furious about the manhandling of corpses and are urging Putin to take serious actions in helping international rescuers bring the bodies home. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who described the scenes of separatists removing bodies as grotesque, said during an interview with CNN that the U.S. knows with confidence that Ukraine did not have a weapon capable of downing a jet. He added that it was pretty clear a missile system had been transferred from Russia. Meanwhile, an urgent vote led by Australia is expected to take place within the next 24 hours in the UN Security Council on a resolution that would condemn the shooting down of the plane and demand those responsible be held accountable. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
In recent weeks, North Korea has increasingly been flip-flopping. The regime, which has repeatedly proposed putting an end to slandering between the two Koreas, threatened retaliation against Seoul and Washington's criticisms over its recent missile testing. Not just this, Pyongyang also sent mixed signals about its participation at the Incheon Asian Games this fall. Choi You-sun has the details.
North Korea's powerful National Defense Commission has given an ultimatum to Seoul and Washington, saying their isolating policies towards Pyongyang will only be met with retaliation. Citing its recent proposals to Seoul that the two sides refrain from slandering each other, the commission said it has done everything possible to improve inter-Korean ties and that the time has come for a final decision. The latest threat comes after Seoul and Washington, as well as the international community, strongly criticized Pyongyang's recent short-range missile tests. North Korea also flip-flopped in regards to its participation at the upcoming Asian Games hosted by the South. Days after walking out of last Thursday's inter-Korean talks on its attendance, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un highlighted cross-border reconciliation and cooperation through the sporting event on Sunday.
saying the Asian Games will be an important opportunity for the two Koreas to improve ties and alleviate distrust. He added sports are sacred and should not be used as a political bargaining chip for rebellious powers.
Reporting on Kim's observation of the North Korean national football team, Pyongyang's state media added North Korea has decided to send a delegation of athletes to the Incheon Asian Games from September 19th to October 4th. The North's apparent flip-flopping is thought to be its way of pressuring the South to return to negotiations. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
So, sending mixed signals to the South, test-firing missiles one day, talking about reconciliation and cooperation the next, and then threatening a retaliation. Is this a new tactic under leader Kim Jong-un? How should North Korea's latest actions be assessed? Hwang Sung-hee posed these questions to Robert Collin, a former U.S. State Department official dealing mostly with North Korea.
The North Koreans will never be one thing or the other. And here's the difference. Up until the point at which negotiations actually start, you'll see both streams going side by side. Once negotiations start, you'll see much less, and in some cases none at all, of these what we consider provocative actions.
You've also been holding informal talks with North Korea. Do you see any changes in perhaps their willingness to engage?
As far as you can judge, they really keep trying to figure out what it would take to get a positive response from the United States. So I don't think there's been a shift. I think they're just frustrated because they think they can't get traction.
We see China and South Korea getting close together, and on the other part, we see Japan and North Korea getting closer together. How do you assess that?
And also the Russians and the Americans not being on very good terms. It looks pretty dismal, the landscape, for putting this back together again in any way that it can be productive. So I suspect that people are going to have to think about a new forum in order to overcome these really negative trends.
So if Prime Minister Abe does visit North Korea, how will that affect the trilateral alliance between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo?
If it were to happen tomorrow, let's say, I think it would be a shock. If it happens some point in the future after different capitals are able to consult and people get more comfortable, maybe it won't be quite as negative.
Do you think it will harm the trilateral cooperation at all?
I think it will. I think there'll be an effort to pretend that it doesn't, but in truth, I think it will be something that people will have to work very hard at to fix.
How likely is it for us to see Kim Jong-un meet with Xi Jinping or Prime Minister Abe?
I would bet that he would meet with Prime Minister Abe before he meets with Xi Jinping. It's just my sense that that's liable to happen first. Yeah.
And despite North Korea's fickle behavior and attitude, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington's diplomatic engagement with Beijing over the North Korean nuclear issue has kept Pyongyang quote-unquote quieter in recent months. Appearing on NBC's Meet the Press Sunday, Kerry said cooperation with China since his visit to that country last year hasn't led to the expected goals in regards to Pyongyang's denuclearization, but that they were moving forward in that respect. Kerry's remarks likely reflect the fact the North didn't conduct a fourth nuclear test as it had threatened to earlier this year, and that it hasn't launched any long-range missiles as of late. The UN Security Council last week, however, condemned Pyongyang's recent series of short-range missile tests towards the East Sea off the Korean peninsula. And time now for a look through some of the other international headlines we're following this Monday. For that, we'll turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the News Center.
Eunice, one day after the bloodiest day of the Israel-Hamas conflict thus far, world leaders are finally moving now, and we hear that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is headed to Egypt.
Right. U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki did confirm that Secretary Kerry will fly to Cairo today to work on a ceasefire agreement with Egyptian officials, whom you'll remember had proposed a truce last week that Hamas had rejected. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council is convened in an emergency meeting. They're discussing a draft resolution by Council member Jordan, which calls for, among other things, the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces and lifting of restrictions in and out of the Gaza Strip. Now, fighting on Sunday claimed the most number of casualties on both the Palestinian and Israeli sides. More than 60 Palestinians in one crowded Gaza City neighborhood had forced thousands to flee their homes to take refuge as well. Meanwhile, 13 Israeli fighters were killed in an ambush, all members of the Golani Brigade. The Israeli ambassador to the UN, this is a breaking development, has denied Hamas claims that they have captured an Israeli soldier as simply untrue. Tripoli International Airport continues to be the site of rival militia fighting. Sunday's struggle killed at least 4 people and caused thousands of nearby residents to flee their homes. It marks the most serious violence in the Libyan capital city since the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, pitting the Zintan fighters defending its control of the air hub and its allies against groups tied to the western coastal town of Misrata, armed with Grad missiles, rockets, and anti-aircraft weaponry. A doctor from a local hospital said it received 9 wounded from the area. Just days earlier, one powerful militia had said it was ready to put an end to the heavy clashes riddling the oil-producing North African state. And in the U.S. state of Florida, a jury has ordered the country's second largest cigarette maker, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, to cough up $23.6 billion in punitive damages. The ruling hands victory to widow Cynthia Robinson, who filed the lawsuit on behalf of her husband, Michael Johnson. He died of lung cancer in 1996 at the age of 36 after smoking for more than 2 decades. She argued the tobacco giant was negligent in failing to warn of the addictive nature of smoking, among other dangers. The verdict marks the largest wrongful death payout for a single plaintiff in Florida's history. R.J. Reynolds, which produces the Camel, Winston, and Cool brands, called the damages grossly excessive and impermissible and said it would appeal. And finally, Forbes Media has sold a majority stake in its company to a Hong Kong-based group of international investors. Steve Forbes will remain as chairman and editor-in-chief after the sale to Integrated Whale Media Investments for an undisclosed sum goes through. Forbes said the sale of the company founded by his grandfather should be seen as an opportunity to continue and strengthen the company's mission. Forbes Media had been under family ownership for 97 years.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11. Now, 97 days have passed since the Seoul ferry sank in waters off southwestern Korea, taking with it the lives of more than 300 people, including a great many young high school students. Now, with more questions than answers about who and what was to blame for this awful disaster, the National Assembly on Monday kicked off a special parliamentary session. They're seeking to pass a special bill that should hopefully answer those questions, but as our Ji Myung-gil reports, the rival parties will first have to make some compromises.
Lawmakers ended an extra parliamentary session in June without much progress to speak of regarding a bill that's aimed at determining the cause of April's ferry disaster. They'll hope to resolve their differences during this session, which opens today and runs through August 19th. The legislation calls for the creation of a parliamentary inspection team and outlines measures to provide compensation for the families of the victims, some of who have been on a hunger strike since last week, demanding that the bill be passed by this Thursday. For that to happen, the nation's two main political parties will first have to resolve their differences. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy wants a special judicial police officer appointed to the parliamentary inspection team to ensure the effectiveness of the investigation. The ruling Henry Party has raised concerns about the idea, saying it could disturb judicial order and the division of powers prescribed by Korea's constitution. Instead, the ruling party has proposed appointing a special prosecutor to conduct investigations at the request of the inspection team. The unified main opposition has accused the ruling party of trying to block passage of the special bill, while the ruling party is blaming the main opposition for playing politics with the issue heading into the July 30th by-elections, where 15 parliamentary seats will be decided. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now, in some economic news, the country's new finance minister sat down for talks with the chief of the nation's central bank earlier this morning, with both agreeing that there are growing downside risks stemming largely from April's ferry disaster. But the finance minister made it clear that any decision over the nation's key interest rate falls solely upon the central bank. Hwang Jie has the details.
Cooperating to support the Korean economy. That's what the nation's top two economic policymakers agreed upon in their first meeting. Finance Minister Choi You-sun, who took office last week, met with the Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol on Monday. They both shared views that the pace of economic recovery at home is slowing amid downside risks stemming from sluggish domestic demand, largely due to the ferry disaster in April. The two also shared concerns over structural problems within the domestic economy, such as the imbalance between the nation's exports and domestic demand and the divide between corporate and household income. Based on that understanding, Choi and Lee agreed that it's important to integrate fiscal and monetary policies to tide over the problems at hand. That, however, will be done under one precondition, respecting the unique role of the two different bodies. Finance Minister Choi emphasized that a change in the nation's key interest rate is a decision that the central bank makes independently. The meeting comes amid growing speculation that the appointment of the finance minister, who is widely known to be pro-growth, may exert pressure on the central bank to cut the key rate. While the new finance minister has not directly addressed the need for a cut, his recent remarks point to easing monetary policy to spur growth. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, smartwatches are rising as a new growth engine for the IT industry. Market research firm Display Search says global shipments of smartwatches for next year will come to nearly 32.6 million, up more than 260% from this year. At an average of 34% growth annually, the figure is expected to more than double in 7 years. Samsung Electronics introduced its first smartwatch, the Galaxy Gear, last year, and Google and LG Electronics quickly followed suit. Apple is expected to enter the market later this year. The aging of Korea's population raises a number of economic challenges for the country. Chief among them is how to provide for the elderly when they are old and not working. New OECD data shows that while there are currently more than 5 working-age Koreans supporting every senior citizen, that number will drop to just under 2 by the year 2036. The number has been on the steady decline over the years. Back in the 1950s, there were about 15 working-age Koreans for every 1 senior citizen. Currently, only Chile and Mexico have more economically active people supporting every senior among OECD members. But by 2036, only 4 nations will have less people supporting the aged.
Now, we should be in the middle of monsoon season at this time of the year in Korea, but it seems things are turning out quite differently this year. Rain has been hard to come by so far this summer, and the so-called dry monsoon is having an effect on the buying habits of Koreans. Connie Kim reports.
monsoon period here in Korea, which usually falls from late June to late July, is when the nation receives about 40% of its precipitation for the whole year. But weaker than normal atmospheric pressure from the North Pacific has made for dry conditions so far this summer, and it's had a direct effect on consumer spending.
Rain boots and umbrellas are usually flying off the shelves by now, but not this year.
Our sales have been dominated more by people going on vacation this year. Folding tables and camping-related items have been quite popular.
Sales of leisure or folding tables have jumped the most among all summer products, followed by camping and barbecue gear. It's a sign that consumers are adjusting to the abnormally dry weather conditions. Some 400 millimeters of rain fell on Seoul from July 1st to the 15th last year, while just 23.5 millimeters has fallen this year. As such, less people are buying rain boots, umbrellas, and other rain-related products, including dehumidifiers, which have been affected the most among all electric items. The retail industry has also had to adjust its marketing strategies.
Compared to last year, we aren't featuring dehumidifiers or clothing that usually sells well during the monsoon period. We've cut out our coverage of these items by about 20 to 30%.
Instead, they're promoting more vacation-related products, which have enjoyed a sales boom 2 to 3 weeks earlier than normal. Industry insiders say some retail shops have already started focusing on their upcoming fall products, as the monsoon season isn't forecast to be as severe as in years past. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Ever since the virus that causes AIDS was discovered in the early 1980s, scientists around the world have been working on finding a cure. Now, 3 decades later, a team of Korean researchers believes they've taken one big step towards that ultimate goal. Shin Se-min has the details.
Over 35 million people worldwide are currently infected with HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. There is no cure and there's no vaccine, although Korean researchers believe they may be on the right track toward developing one. A team from Seoul National University says they have discovered an enzyme called SAMHD that breaks up the RNA of the part of virus that contains the infection. They say it leaves open the possibility of completely blocking off the infection in the first place.
The HIV gene is composed of RNA strands, and the SAMHD1 cellular enzyme takes direct aim at the gene and completely restrains the virus from developing.
The team is optimistic that the SAMHD1 enzyme can be developed into an AIDS vaccine over time.
Even if the virus mutates, as it normally does, the newly discovered enzyme will identify the changes, thereby raising the possibility of creating a vaccine.
That would take time, though, up to 10 years to be exact, as the research team is now just wrapping up their basic cell research. The new findings have been published in the medical journal Nature Medicine. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Well, it's going to be a sweltering hot day today, with the afternoon highs are expected to soar to low to mid-30s across most regions. So heat wave advisories and warnings have been expanded to much of the country. So please don't forget to apply a good amount of sunblock and drink plenty of water to prevent heat stroke. And it seems like a fair amount of sun will be shining down on us throughout the day. So with the sun and heat and humidity, it's going to feel hotter than actual temperatures. So let's take a closer look at those numbers. The high in Seoul will rise to 32, while Daegu will climb to 35, and Gwangju and Busan will have daily highs of 31 and 30 respectively. And for other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon should see highs of 29 and 32, and Dokdo should rise to 28. And from tomorrow, we are expecting monsoon rain here in Seoul. It's forecasted to rain from the late in the evening and will linger throughout the week. And this round of monsoon rain will actually drop the temperatures, if you've noticed. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Jinju and I will be back at the same time on Tuesday. Until then, goodbye.